Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are, and welcome to the latest edition of Free Thought Hour. First of all, though, I must make an apology because Global Atheist News hasn't gone out tonight. Woo! It was a bit of a struggle because Steve, my producer, our producer, had taken it in hand and done all sorts of clever visual stuff with it that I can't do myself. And he tried to upload it so that it could play at 8 o'clock UK time, as it should, but it struggled to get there. So I'm afraid there's been no Global Atheist News, but there will be. We will get it uploaded and point you to it as soon as we can. And then, of course, tomorrow we will have our panel of opinionated people who will give their views on the news. And one member of that panel will be Tercia. Hello,
Good
Tercia.
evening, people of the world, from a sunny South Africa.
And in the winter, a sunny but wintry.
Even in winter, it's cold, but it's still sunny.
Yes, we have sun in the winter too. In fact, at my daughter's school, one of the boys said, "Why does your father always collect you wearing his sunglasses?" And I had to point out that they are sunglasses, not summer glasses. And, we do have sun in the winter and it's low in the sky and you need them even more. Anyway, that's enough of this nonsense. Let's introduce our guest tonight, who is Chris Shelton. Hello, Chris.
Hi.
How well are you?
I am well this evening, this day, this fine Saturday. I'm having a good time.
Great, and thank you very much for joining us, because you're also a podcaster of somewhat greater stature to us, I think. You've been doing it for how long?
That's how YouTube works. You just kind of build it up. Yep.
Yeah. How long have you been doing it?
8 years.
Wow. Yeah, that's a long time. Mm.
Yeah, it's a marathon, not a sprint, as they say.
Yeah. Well, it's longer than us anyway. So the reason we've got you on the show is because you kindly accepted my invitation to talk about your ex-faith, which was Scientology.
Indeed.
And so at one time you were in the company of Tom Cruise and what's her name? Who's now left it? Tom
Katie
Cruise.
Leah Remini.
Katie Holmes. That's it. Yes.
Katie Holmes. Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
So did you actually rub shoulders with him? I mean, as in, really?
I never met Tom Cruise. I was always 5 minutes behind. There were 3 times where he was, within my range or vicinity, but I did not catch up with him. I met other Scientology celebrities, but I did not meet him.
Well, for what it's worth, and it's not probably, I don't know if it's a reflection on you or Scientology or Tom Cruise, but he just did a movie. I think the latest Mission Impossible movie was shot in South Africa. And the people in the town that he lived in are very much taken with him. They all say he's a really, really nice guy. So, but you wouldn't be able to corroborate that for us since you were always 5 minutes too late. But what were you in time for? What parts of Scientology were you in time for?
I don't understand the question.
No, I'm joking. I said you were late for Tom Cruise, but what were you on time for? So tell us about that.
Well, I was involved with Scientology for 27 years. So I was raised with it. I kind of grew up with it. And out of when I finished my schooling, high school, I was recruited to work for Scientology. So 25 of those years I spent actually in the employment, you could say, of the Church of Scientology. Even though it's a sort of a volunteer organization.
Was that Sea Org? Is it Sea Org?
I worked also for the Sea organization. Yeah. So at first I worked at a city level church in Santa Barbara and California, as that's where I was born and raised, was in California. And
so you were born into it. So there wasn't much choice. You didn't make a conscious decision.
No, I'm second generation. I was raised with it. My parents got involved with Scientology when I was about 3 years old.
Yeah.
So all my living memory is Scientology related in terms of my upbringing and stuff.
It's funny how most people catch their religion like a disease from their parents or their surrounding society, isn't it?
Yeah, it is kind of fortunate that everybody just happened to be born in the exact right household with the exact right faith, right?
Exactly. Yes, and their God is the only true one.
That's right.
Yes.
Chris, can I ask? I grew up in a fairly fundamentalist. It wasn't called a cult; it was a church. We called it a church. And I know quite a bit about Scientology, but I've never heard the perspective from somebody who was born into it. Did you have anything like in the church that I grew up in? We had catechism, and we had lessons, and like some people called it Sunday school. Is there anything like that for kids and teenagers, or like a children's service, or a sermon specifically aimed at children? Is there anything like similar to that in Scientology?
There are services that are delivered that are meant for children. Scientology is delivered through classes or coursework and through counseling or auditing is what they call it in Scientology. Counseling is a bit of a stretch to call it that, but it's two people in a room. You're being asked questions and going over things in your life. So to that degree, that's auditing. And there are services, there's auditing services, and there are coursework that they do direct towards children.
Can I tell you a bit about my experience? It's not a personal experience, but I roomed when I was doing my first degree with a fellow student who went off after he passed his finals to join Scientology. And I know that he actually offered me the opportunity to be the lead guitar player in their Scientology band, which I didn't accept. But this guy, I won't reveal his name. I don't want to out him on here. But he went off, and this was probably in the middle 60s, because I'm ever so old. But he stayed with Scientology until sometime in the 80s, and then he finally left. And there was a lot of toing and froing and mudslinging between the Remainers and him. They don't like you to leave.
No, they don't. They don't like you to leave. No.
Exactly. Bolilang has a question. That is it true that they frustrate you when you leave it, or that they sort of follow you, or track you, or something like that? Is it how true is that? Is it only for high profile members?
It's a fairly infamous thing that they will never give up your mailing address, and they will track you down, and getting on their mailing list it's quite difficult to get off of those mailing lists. Even if you've only just bought a book from them or something, they will just keep inundating you with mail. But in terms of, a little bit getting into actual membership, if you sort of quietly fade away, you can kind of get away with that. But if you start speaking out or speaking openly in a negative or hostile or, critical way about Scientology, then you are, potentially riling up action against you from Scientology. They are not, I get to say now, as a result of all the activism and work we've been doing for years, that they don't have the teeth they once had. But the stalking and the harassment and the hiring private investigators to come after you and that kind of thing, that still happens, but it really is pretty directed now at only the main primary enemies of the church as they see it. So
would you be one of them?
Like Leah Remini, for example, they still stalk her. But I don't have people parked outside my house.
So you're obviously not doing a good enough job.
Yeah, obviously not. Yeah.
Chris, I want to ask something about the. I want to get back to this idea of church services. So am I right if I deduct from what you said before that it's not as if there's ever a gathering of people and that there's a service and a preacher like in a traditional church? It's more one-on-one or small group type coursework, like you say. So it's not. Is there ever an event like when a lot of Scientologists get together and sit down and listen to somebody preaching, or is it always like a sort of more like a lecture or a lesson or something like that?
The Church of Scientology officially offers Sunday services, but those are not a primary service or even something that Scientologists are looking forward to or participate in with joy and vigor. There might be a couple people who show up on Sundays. It's not a worship type religion. They don't worship L. Ron Hubbard. They don't worship a deity figure. That's not why Scientology is a religion.
That's interesting. Can I just ask you whether my impression of how Scientology began is in any way accurate? Because I've heard all sorts of rumors about it, and it was created, to my knowledge, by a moderately important science fiction writer whose name was L. Ron Hubbard, and I wondered what was so terrible about his first name with the initial L for him to overpass it in favor of Ron. So I checked that out, and it was Lafayette. So that may be a reason to just use the L and then go for the Ron as a second name. Anyway,
yeah. Nobody ever called him Lafayette. He was always Ron.
Yeah. So, is it correct that he was having an exchange with a friend of his, maybe a drink, and he was complaining about the fact that his science fiction books were not making him enough money, and the story goes that this friend suggested that if he wants to make a lot of money, what he should do is start a religion. Is that folklore?
No, there are 2 or 3 documented instances of L. Ron Hubbard saying that if you want to make, a buck, then start a religion, or that's where religion is where the money is. These were writers group conversations that he had, and he was quoted in a conversation with another writer friend of his as having said that. So we don't have a whole lot of question that that's what he said, but his motivations for starting Scientology were personal as well as financial. The economic gain was absolutely part of the picture, and I'll be super clear and very blunt in saying that Scientology, the Church of Scientology, and its entire operation is, at its core, at its heart, it is a money-making scam. That's what it's doing.
Yeah.
But there are other reasons Hubbard had for starting it as well.
Yeah, he hated philosophers, didn't he? No, psychologists.
Psychologists.
Yes. Yes.
Psychiatry specifically is what Scientology goes after with real vim and vigor. They have programs they've put together, and they have very, very high-minded ideas of themselves as being the people who are going to destroy and eradicate from the face of the earth the entire subject of psychiatry. It is a winner-take-all kind of war view that they sort of have about their battle against psychiatry.
How did he form that opinion? Was he bitten by a psychiatrist when he was a baby or something?
No, he was rejected by the APA and the AMA when he tried to give them the idea of Dianetics and like, hey, this could be the next big thing in psychology and psychiatry. And they looked at it and said, yeah, I don't think so. And Hubbard was a very, very vindictive man. He did not take criticism lightly from anybody on anything. And so to be rejected outright to him was the ultimate, stab in the back. And he thought that the best way to deal with that would be to repay it in kind. So, Yeah.
So something I find interesting is, I mean, this was in the 50s or 60s. Whereabouts did it start? Just help.
1950 is when Dianetics was published.
So what I know about psychiatry, I mean, that's a time when people did lobotomies and when electric shock therapy was the vogue. So if psychiatrists didn't accept Dianetics at that time, you can imagine how bad it must have been. So even for 1950s psychiatry not to go for it, because psychiatry at that time had some really odd treatments. And I mean, if you think of what was actually done to people by psychiatry, but obviously that wasn't part of Hubbard's motivation. It was purely vindictiveness, which is, but it gives an indication of how crazy his idea must have been for not even 1950 psychiatry to have accepted it.
Yes.
Can I ask something?
Electrocuting as a brain is okay, but Dianetics, oh no.
Yes. I want to just ask something about the whole thing that it's not really a worship religion, but so do many Scientology members really believe the stuff about the cosmic overlord and the spaceships? I mean, I suppose it's almost like asking how many Christians really believe in the Immaculate Conception, but it's an interesting, are there really people who believe all that sort of science fiction stuff? Did you believe that, Chris?
No, I never made it to that level while I was still a Scientologist. But yes, there are people who believe that. Yeah.
So tell us about this process of auditing, because I understand it contains this e-meter device where, what's that got? 2 handles and it measures your sweat or something, conductivity?
Yes, the auditing process is basically a form of hypnotism, you could say, might be the easiest way to put it across. There are a lot of thought reform or brainwashing techniques being utilized in an auditing session. Hypnotism is one of them. Trance induction is what I mean by that. This is there's indoctrination, so there's preset ideas of what it is you're supposed to experience, and a process that is the same from session to session to session. So the expectation that every session is going to end with you experiencing some kind of spiritual epiphany and realization, and you're going to be very happy at the end, and that kind of thing. There's a euphoria induction that's occurring here.
Yes.
So that's part of what the auditing process is.
So you're told what to expect to happen to you. It's a bit like you're going to have a vision, isn't it?
A little bit like that. I mean, that's kind of a stretch. Scientologists wouldn't think of it that way, but basically, yeah, that's what's happening.
Would you say that there's an addictive element to it?
Very much so. Yeah.
Okay, because in my opinion, people that go, especially the more charismatic churches, when you're with people, it's a different type of emotional awakening, but there definitely is a release of endorphins that people sort of they go back for the high, and that's why they have to going back, because there is a real physical effect, be it dancing with the crowd and going like this, or having somebody speak and I can absolutely see that it could be have an addictive element to it.
Yes, very much so.
But you don't have these communal worship events, though.
There are not communal worship events. However, there are regular briefings. And during the time of COVID, this kind of got shut down because they couldn't be doing any public gatherings. But this is coming back now. And what they do is they'll celebrate significant dates or events in Scientology's history, right? So every May 9th, they celebrate the anniversary of the publication of the book Dianetics. Or on March 13th, that's when they celebrate L. Ron Hubbard's birthday.
That's the ritual. That's the ritual element. That's the repetition, the ritual.
Well, it's not. It's a lot more organized than that, because it's not just a ritual of meeting and gathering and eating birthday cake. It's actually, there's an entire briefing put on where David Miscavige, the current leader of Scientology, will come out on a stage in a very formal process with lights and, you know, cameras and videos and all kinds of productions and graphics, and it's a very, very high expensive affair to put on one of these events, and they do it multiple times during the year. And during these events, Miscavige will brief the public Scientologists who attend live, or they'll transmit it, you know, video it around the world. And he will, tell all the Scientologists how much expansion the church has been exhibiting lately, or how it's growing, and how it's doing so much better, and how it's being accepted by the military or these government officials, or these kind of things. And these are basically a bunch of lies. Right? They make up numbers, they exaggerate numbers, they make up stories and just sell them to the Scientologists as though this is reality. But when you go fact check it, you find out almost every single claim they're making isn't true. But they've got Scientologists in a state of mind where they're not going to go fact check it. They need this good news, because they need to feel that there is a good reason why they're Scientologists. And so they need this, and this is part of that addiction sort of thing, is because it makes you feel really good when you're part of the winning group. So there's never, ever an event put on where bad news or negative statistics are presented. It's always good news, good news, good news, even though they're literally making most of it up.
Yeah, it's like the Good News Bible. Can I ask?
Sorry, John, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask whether there's music involved in these events, because, as I said, I was invited to become the guitarist, or the lead guitarist. In fact, I wasn't interested in the job, but it seemed to me that there was some sort of entertainment that belonged to Scientology, in the same way that you have gospel singers in the Baptist movement.
Yes, there are definitely Scientologists who are professional musicians, and Scientology utilizes pro musicians in its event production. And they do Scientology songs, and they have Scientology music albums. And, this is definitely part of their culture.
Music is such a powerful weapon.
It's an incredibly powerful motivator and influencer, yes.
I wanted to ask whether Scientology does any active proselytizing and how and where do they would they? I've seen on the internet these ads about psychics, for example. Would they use fronts would they use like Kasamba, and then you click on that, and then when you go, it's actually Scientology? Or how do they proselytize? I have no idea.
Okay, yeah, they do all of the above. Scientology does street pass outs and promotional material pass outs. They have free personality tests. They try to get people in. They do those online as well. They have a sort of a 10 characteristic, incredibly non-scientific. I mean, they literally made it up themselves. Test. They call it a personality test. They actually assign it, they call it the Oxford Capacity Analysis, which is this incredibly scientific sounding thing that has nothing to do with Oxford and never did.
Yes.
And it's not even an analysis. It's just this made up hokum, right? But they have this thing, and they've had it since the 1950s, and they use it in a way to try to sit a person down, take the test, go over the results with them, and it's very much like a psychic warm reading. What they're doing is they're trying to get you to tell them all about yourself under the guise of getting this test evaluation, right? So they have that's a very popular way of getting people in. But the biggest 75% of Scientologists come in through friends and family. That's how they get most people in.
I'm not at all surprised to hear that they were making use of the name Oxford in order to resonate with the university of worldwide renown. And it's the same principle as taking the word science for the name and sticking ology on the end of it to try and rub off on the credibility of science.
Sure, of course. Hubbard was all about that. I mean, Dianetics was presented to the world in 1950 as the subtitle is The Modern Science of Mental Health. Hubbard put it out there as though he had created a new branch of psychology called Dianetics. And the AMA and the APA rejected it because there was absolutely nothing scientific about his process. He just sat down at a typewriter and wrote this stuff out, and he repeatedly said, we have conducted laboratory experiments. This has been proven by clinical results. There's no tests. There's no case studies. There's no reports. There's nothing validating any of this. He just made it all up, called it a science, and foisted it off on the world. And that's why within 2 years, Dianetics had bankrupted itself twice. And Hubbard had to go on the religion angle, as he called it. He have to use the religion angle because as a science, Hubbard was making very exaggerated claims that Dianetics and its processes could cure leukemia, cancer, bad eyesight, right? Thrombosis, all these different things. And he was making medical claims, and there was no question about it. And a couple of Dianeticists up in the Chicago area actually got arrested for this.
Right. Oh, I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, they were like, oh, man, we got to pull the plug on this. And that's where Dianetics kind of tanked and Scientology emerged.
I see. So Dianetics came first, and he typed it up just like he did his science fiction novels from his head. And then had to turn it into Scientology later to rescue it from the ashes that it had become.
That's right. That's right.
Chris, there was a question from Dean, my buddy from Cape Town, about the Scientology rehab method. Do they have rehab centers? Do they just have a methodology based on auditing, or how does that work?
Yes, they have a drug rehab program called Narcon. It was started by a guy back in 1969 who was a drug addict who used some Scientology principles to sort of discipline himself out of that. And then they decided that Hubbard created a quote unquote detox program in the 1970s, which was originally called the Sweat Out program. Now they call it the Purification program. It's again, total nonsense. It's actually dangerous for people because they will go and spend hours at a time inside a hot sauna, sweating out what they believe are toxins out of their body. This is, biochemists and health officials actually know this is really, really bad for you to be doing. And they do this on top of taking mega doses of vitamins that are the supplements are not good for you at that level. And can actually be destructive. And of course, when you're spending hours in a sauna, you're, exposing you to heat exhaustion and heat stroke. So there's problems there. But this is their methodology. The reason I'm talking about this is their methodology for getting somebody off drugs and keeping them off drugs, is they do this detox, and then they do these other Scientology auditing processes in order to get a person to no longer be addicted to drugs. And none of this works. This is really very subpar drug rehab, but it is a Scientology front group, Narcon. And so if you see anything ever connected with Narcon or anything like that, you want to run, not walk in the other direction, because they're just going to take your money. People have died doing these programs, and in fact, it was a few years ago that this was making major news. The state of Oregon, where they were operating a big front group, actually investigated them formally, and it was, there was just a bunch of bureaucratic rigmarole as to why charges weren't brought. But people died under Scientology's care in this Narcon program. So it's not good stuff.
Yeah. Well, I'm not surprised to hear that they called it Narcon, because
it
obviously
sounds very good, eh?
Yeah.
It resonates with Alcoholics Anonymous, which of course was a surreptitious way of selling Christianity.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk to you a bit about the idea of sweating out these toxins, because that's in the auditing program, isn't it? You have the concept of these engrams, and you have to get rid of them, and then you become clear. Have I got that right?
You do, although that doesn't have anything to do with the detox program. But yes, that's auditing. That's what Dianetics is all about, is engrams. Hubbard, basically, the simple version is that Hubbard said that your mind consists of 3 different parts or sections, and the one that Dianetics addresses is the subconscious or reactive mind. This is how Hubbard describes it. And he says that this mind contains memories of every time in your life that you have experienced moments of pain and unconsciousness. And even if the unconsciousness was only for a microsecond or something, you hit your thumb with a hammer or something, you're kind of out of it for a second, that goes straight into, Hubbard says, the reactive mind. And this incident of pain and unconsciousness is called an engram. And all the perceptions of that engram are stored subconsciously and will come back at you later if you are experiencing an approximation of those same things. You get bit by a dog. That's very painful. You have an engram. A year later, you're walking down the street, minding your own business, not thinking about the dog at all. And you hear a dog barking in the background and your hand starts hurting. The dog bit you, see? So there's this sort of connection, but you don't connect it consciously. It's all subconscious. And the auditing process that Dianetics offers, and again, this is trance induction and hypnotism. It's not good for you. But what Hubbard said is that you use this process and you can go back and actually erase those engrams and erase all the trauma and what he called charge connected with those engrams, and it won't have an effect on you anymore. So when you hear a dog barking, your hand isn't going to hurt anymore and nothing else bad's going to happen to you. And Hubbard put a great deal of emphasis not only on the physical pain of it, but also the words that were said, because he puts a lot of power in the language. So that's all what an engram is and what Dianetics auditing is supposed to be addressing. And when you're clear, you don't have any more engrams. You've erased them all. They're all gone.
And this process is a bit like being sort of brainwashed, where you listen to people telling you things, or there's some sort of message that you're supposed to adopt. And are you holding the e-meter or something at the same time? What's going on?
Okay, this is a really big subject. So I'm trying to summarize it for you, but there's a lot to know here. The e-meter it came later, so we don't have to necessarily. The e-meter it doesn't have to be there in a session for this to happen. But what you do is you go back and you relive the engram. You re-experience it. You send yourself back and go back through it as though it's happening to you in the here and now. And you you narrate the process as you go. And you go over and over and over it. And this is regression therapy. There's other names for this. This has been known about in psychology for a long time. It doesn't work. It's not a very good process, actually, from a therapeutic standpoint. But Hubbard went all in on this. And it's sort of this amalgamation of old school psychotherapy and hypnotism and other stuff. So that's what the process of it is. You can use an e-meter, and the e-meter is a whole nother thing that's kind of hard to explain. But it's an electronic instrument that's really there for show. It's really there just to kind of sell that you're handling something really important. It doesn't really do much of anything.
Right.
Chris, John, can I just quickly ask, the engrams, can you spell that for me? Is it E-N-G-R-A-M-S?
Yes.
Like that. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this reliving past experiences, this is not a good idea, is it? Because you're reinforcing some stress event. So instead of letting go of it and moving on, you're keeping it to the fore of your knowledge and consciousness. And this is more likely to lead to PTSD than to cure anybody of anything.
Well, that's a very good point, and that's exactly the kind of thing that happens. There's lots of different potential damaging things that can occur from this. And that is one of them. You nailed it there. And there are other reasons why this is not really that great. And again, from a therapeutic, look, it's got very limited workability. This is well plowed territory in psychology, but back in 1950 when Hubbard was putting this together, he made it sound new and exciting and different, and people bought it.
Yeah. Psychology's moved on a lot since then.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. But what strikes me about Hubbard's genius actually is the best lies are the ones that have just enough of a ring of truth to them. Because if you don't have a very good education, and if you don't have at least a rudimentary knowledge of psychology and psychiatry, then it sounds so workable, even, and many people don't have the type of knowledge that is required to be able to be inoculated against this. I'm just thinking about this whole idea of detox. I mean, to this day, we're in 2022, and I know many people who are convinced that, and these are educated people, these are teachers, even one or two doctors, who will say, you have to go on a detox diet. So this idea of detox, it sounds so intuitive. It sounds so possible. So the normal person who doesn't have intimate knowledge of at least how cells and biology, and I used to think that there was such a thing as detox. You get these Chinese stickers that you put under your under your feet, and then you sleep with them, and in the morning it's all black. It's probably just some form of oxidization. But if you don't know anything about physics, which most people don't, I didn't have physics at school, so I didn't know anything about oxidization. So you're going to fall for that hook, line, and sinker. And it's really not difficult. And something else that you said that gives me a frightening indication that some of the concepts of Scientology might have been infiltrating Western Christianity and religious culture, is that you said something about repeating phrases and words are important, and that
iteration.
The affirmation, something that I see on many Facebook pages, and that I even have friends and family members who will say, don't speak it, because if you speak the word, so if you tell somebody, don't drive now, it's raining, the road is wet, it's a dangerous road, then they'll say, don't say that, because you're going to speak, if you say it, you're going to speak it out, and then it's going to happen.
Yeah, let's be clear. We're not talking about law of attraction or The Secret or something like that. That exists in Scientology to a great degree, but that's not what I was referring to when I was saying.
Okay.
What I was talking about was with Hubbard, his stress on words is that if words are said to you during the engram, those words can come back later and mean different things, and you can interpret them differently and be hurt by them. You could be told in an engram, oh man, you're sitting there getting bit by a dog, or you're in the immediate after effect of it, and you're bleeding, and your hands, bleeding out. And here comes some bozo who says, oh man, that looks bad. I don't know if you're going to recover from that. Well, that's nice, right? Thank you very much for saying that. Well, later on, Hubbard says, and this is not true, but this is what Hubbard says, is that those words can come back on you subconsciously and prevent your recovery from that wound.
It's even worse than I thought.
Yeah, here he's saying you're not going to recover from that. And the reactive mind interprets that as a command. You're recover.
Goodness.
It's a bit like a death wish.
Yeah, that's what I meant by the words are important in the engrams.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Words are always given far too much importance in things like spells and prayers, which is supposed to come true.
Exactly. Now, what I would like to comment on in terms of words is that there is a thing that we call in the sort of cult coercive control world, loaded language. This is something that came out of the work of a guy named Robert J. Lifton, who interviewed a bunch of people who had been brainwashed back in communist China. And he did some actual formal study of this. And one of the things that you can use to control people very, very well and very simply is loaded language. You take words and you make them mean something a little different, or maybe even a lot different. And you get people thinking very differently doing that, right? This is propaganda, this is indoctrination, but at the cult level, it becomes what we call loaded language, where, for example, this might sound like a silly example, but this was my life. I lived this for decades. And an example of this is the word critical. In Scientology, if you're critical, that's a very, very, very bad thing.
Oh,
right?
Yes.
How dare you be critical of L. Ron Hubbard? How dare you be critical of the organization? You can't be critical, right? If you're critical, if you're criticizing, in other words, if you're being skeptical, that means that is redefined in Scientology to mean that you have committed moral transgressions, sins, what they call overts, overt acts.
Overt, as in
against the thing you're being critical of. So if I think that you are this horrible, awful person, and I'm telling, my wife or something, oh, that Bill, man, that guy sucks. I hate that guy. Bill should just be stood up against the wall and shot. I just can't stand him. That means in Scientology that I have committed sins against Bill.
Yeah.
And that's the only reason that I'm being critical.
Right.
So the word critical actually takes on a degraded or demeaning definition where if you're critical, that means you're a bad person.
You're a criminal.
Yeah.
Critical means criminal in Scientology.
In Scientology, that is true. And what this has the effect of, for example, just one of many effects this has, it shuts down criticism right away. But it also allows Scientologists who think this way to completely negate anything any critic of Scientology has to say.
Yes.
Because all of us are only being critical because of our overts, our sins, right?
Yeah.
And it gets you thinking a very different way about the world and how to interpret it.
Yeah.
And that's loaded language. It's a very, very powerful cult tool.
Yes.
And Ron Hubbard was quite good at using it. So that's the point I wanted to make with that.
Yeah. It's gaslighting. And it's not
things. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's not a million miles away from your regular religions, is it? I mean, none of them like criticism. They want to shut you down as soon as you start asking difficult questions.
It's true, but very few of them are going to go so far as to say, how dare you question because you're being critical, you have sins. I mean, that's a pretty exaggerated position to have. Nobody appreciates being criticized, but to make it out that you're a bad, evil person for being critical, that's a whole nother level. And that's what Scientology gets away with in that bubble world of Scientology. And that is a very powerful way to shut down all criticism and control it in that world, and that's what they do. If you start getting real critical and real upset with Scientology as a Scientologist, they'll go stick you in a room with a ream of paper and a pen and say, you need to start writing down all your sins, man. You need to write down all your overts because you're being critical.
This is like sending a child to do lines.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Chris, can I ask, you say that you worked for them. What exactly did your job entail? Did you watch people who were writing out the overs?
That was one of many things I did. I worked for the organization for 25 years. I did all kinds of things. I supervised classes. I was an executive over the delivery of Scientology across the Western United States. For about 8 or 9 years, I did that. I sold books. I made books. They have an in-house publishing facility. I worked there for 9 months. I recruited people onto joining staff or working for the Sea organization. And I did recovery projects and stuff. I went around in different cities around America, and I went knocking on doors and, hey, come back into the fold. Let's get you back in, And I was that guy showing up at your door. I was a lot of different things in Scientology. Yeah.
I can imagine you were good at that.
I actually was pretty good at it. Yeah, I did okay.
I'm not going to ask how you got out because we have about 15 minutes left. I will go and listen to your podcast and your shows. But I do want to ask, I spoke to somebody today who just came out of the SEJ cult, and she really expressed that she still feels adrift and sometimes lost. Did you have any experience like that when you came out, or were you just fed up and happy to be free, or did you feel that you had to rebuild your entire worldview? What was it like? Did you feel lost, adrift, lonely, and how did you handle that if you did feel like anything like that?
Yeah, no, absolutely I did. It's very, very important for people to get a support system in place after they leave a destructive cult, because the cult has been their support system. And without some support system, we are adrift. Human beings don't operate alone, right? We just don't. So it's just part of our emotional makeup, right? So it's really important that people get a support system. Mine was my family right away, because my parents actually got out of Scientology before I did. It's a long story. We don't need to go there right now. But the point is that my mom and my dad were there for me, and especially my mom. I spent hours and hours and hours and hours on the phone with her kind of helping me along. That first year was the roughest. 2013 is when I got out, and that year was tough. I had a lot to learn, and I told myself I look back and it was a very silly thing to say, but I told myself, I'm giving myself a year. I'm going to be recovered. I'm going to be over it. It's going to be great. I'm going to be all done in a year. Right. And after a year, I wasn't even close. And I was like, oh man, this is going to take a little longer. And after 2 years, it started to finally dawn on me that recovering from a cult experience is kind of a lifelong thing. And especially for somebody who's involved 25, 27, 30 years. I mean, you don't just snap your fingers and get over that. No. And the way I try to compare it, that I think might make sense to people, I'm not sure yet, but I think is if I say, look, it's like moving to a different country.
Yeah.
You got to relearn everything, and you're going to be really weirded out by all the little things. It's not the big stuff that's going to get you. It's all the little stuff that's going to get you. And you want to have somebody, you want to have some contacts in that foreign country who speak the language and know the customs and can help you out. Otherwise, it's going to be all on you, and good luck learning a new language on your own, right?
Yeah.
It's hard. Cult recovery is hard, and there's a lot of elements to it. So your friend, me, it's a known thing that is a common feeling for people coming out of these situations, and it really takes friends and family who can listen without judgment, and can just help the person along, and the person will eventually come right. But it takes time.
Yeah. Well, we are seriously social animals.
Yeah.
We don't do well without companionship. And
Right.
people don't realize how vulnerable they are in their formative years. So the stuff you were fed back then as a child is very difficult to shed. It's like asking you to forget learning to speak, to forget the language that you've learned, because it went in at the same time and is embedded together with that learning to speak experience. But I wanted to ask you, Chris, about the Scientology attitude towards the milestones of life, birth, death, afterlife, rebirth, marriage. What's Scientology got to say about those things?
Okay. Well, Scientology's core belief or principle of faith is that you, me, everybody are spiritual entities. We are not bodies. The body that you have, I have, it's like a set of clothes. It's something you have, you own it, you possess it, you use it, and it grows, it lives, it dies, and you go get another one. And you go through them, right. And it's life after life after life after life, and it's an endless cycle of that.
Do you remember these previous existences?
Well, I'll get there. So Scientologists believe that you have lived a near infinite amount of time into the past, and that you cannot die. You are never, ever going to die. So you're going to have an existence into the future that is infinite. But that the quality of your existence is relegated to being stuck in a body on a second-rate planet in a third-rate civilization, in this very warlike, hostile environment. And Scientology says this is all a little nuts. We should live better than this, and we can if we regain our true spiritual nature and abilities, because we are, each of us, kind of like God. We have infinite spiritual power and ability. And this physical universe that we all live in, this playground that has kind of become a prison, is something that is not inherently evil or awful, but we have forgotten our true nature. We have been traumatized to such a degree over so many lifetimes that we've built up so much charge that we can't even remember our past lives anymore. It's all a blur. It's all gone. It's not there. We don't even want to remember it because it's so painful to remember. So this is the sales job of Scientology. This is what they're selling.
Yeah.
So, and I don't believe a word of it anymore. Okay, but I did. I thought this was actually how we were going to save the world.
Wow.
And it's through the process of auditing that you relive all of that past and remember it bit by bit, piece by piece, little by little. You're never going to remember all 4 quadrillion years of your existence here, but you'll get enough of it that you'll go, oh, right. It's really just your imagination. I mean, don't get me wrong. I don't believe in past lives, but Scientologists do. And Scientology's entire dogma, it rests on the concept that past lives are very, very real. And it's through the auditing process that those memories are revealed to you. And you come to then accept, because you have this very powerful subjective experience, you believe, oh, well, it must be true.
Yeah.
And how else would I remember that death, in the Napoleonic Army in 1863, right? Or how else would I remember blowing up planets 10 million years ago, in the Capricorn system or something, right? Like, this is how Scientologists think.
Yes.
Because they are led to believe that these imaginary incidents that they are made to recall in their auditing really happened. They think they're having real memories. And this is another part of the damaging, the damage that is presented to them as Scientologists. But this is part of it, right? And very much, Dean comments here about Hinduism. Hubbard stole from everything. He stole from.
Buddhism. I was going to say that it's a real mishmash. Hey,
it is.
He's taking from everywhere.
He did.
Yeah. It reminded me of the fall from Christianity as well. Where
all in there. It's all.
Yeah.
So Hubbard had Hubbard followed basically in the tradition of 19th century spiritualism and the occult. There's a lot of mysticism and occult beliefs in Scientology, but they're not. But see, Scientologists don't realize that. They're sold on it as though all of it was created by or discovered by L. Ron Hubbard.
Yeah.
Hubbard just plagiarized the occult. And Aleister Crowley and Madame Blavatsky and old school spiritualism. The whole concept of ascended masters, that there are levels like the Freemasons, there's levels of indoctrination. That's all in the Scientology mix.
Wow. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's quite a big topic. That's why when I tell people, when we're going to start talking about this, and it's going to go because there's a lot to know about this, but it's all kind of, silly in the end.
I love Dean's comment here. Look at this. People always remember their past lives as a prince or wealthy merchant, never the life as a housefly eating poop.
Yeah, that's right. I guarantee you that is true. I have encountered enough people remembering enough past life stuff that it does tend to be that way. Not always, of course. Not always. Yeah. Not everybody is Cleopatra and Caesar, but
Is it possible to choose your future body? Because if it were, geez, I would like to be tall and blonde and blue-eyed, and living in some Nordic country.
I mean, theoretically, if you go get a baby in a hospital in Norway, I guess you'd have a shot at that. But see, the idea is that you're not just a happy, free spiritual being. You have been implanted and brainwashed and controlled, and there are dark, nefarious forces at work, and the universe is a pretty grim place in Scientology's sort of cosmology.
Well, Chris, we're knocking up to the end of our hour now, and you've been every bit as fantastic as I knew you would, especially after our earlier conversation that we had. For everyone watching, I do a pre-chat if I possibly can. It's very rare for us to have somebody on the show cold that we haven't sounded out and, given the okay to beforehand. But we've just got time for me to plug next week's guest. Because next Saturday, we have booked Dr. Theo Sib. That may be a Twitter handle. I haven't really gone into it in any detail yet. But I have spoken to him, and I do know that he is a computer buff to the extent of having designed some processors, the brains of computers, the hardware bits, not just the software. He does software too, but there you go. That's the person we're going to talk to next week. So if you've got any questions on that subject material, like, for example, is there ever going to be artificial intelligence? Bring them along to next week's show. Tercia, thank you very much for your help.
I am no help at all. I think I just asked some questions that you probably had in your mind as well, but I feel so privileged. Thank you, Chris. It was very interesting. Thank you for correcting me on that misconception that I had about the words and speaking words, and I'll be delighted to go and check out your other work. And thanks so much for sharing an hour of your precious life with us, in this universe of struggling and strife. It was very nice. Thank you so much.
Thanks for inviting me. It was fun.
And thanks for watching. Whether you've been watching us live or in the future, the podcast, thank you very much. And I hope that you'll be able to watch us next week too. Say bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.